What really is the Erdtree? Where did it come from? Why did its Age of Plenty end? And why does it look like that? Or that? Or that? The story of the upcoming Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and its central character Messmer, is no doubt core to the mystery of the main game. We know from Miyazaki's interviews that it contains history originally written by George R.R. Martin, central to the narrative of Elden Ring's demigods and the Shattering, but befitting its designation as a land of shadow, its history has been obscured, its battles unsung. But we don't have to wait until June to start putting together this narrative puzzle, for there is a trail of clues stretching across the main game and the DLC trailer, and leading us to the inescapable conclusion that Messmer played the starring role in one of Elden Ring's most impactful and yet mysteriously untold stories, that of the first burning of the Erdtree. From the very first moment we enter the Lands Between, the game hints to us that we are not the first to try to become Elden Lord, nor to modify the Elden Ring, nor indeed even to burn down the Erdtree. The Memory of Lost Grace description, present in the inventory of all Tarnished who have crossed the Sea of Fog to arrive at the Chapel of Anticipation before they even take their first steps, reads, quote, "It is merely a cycle. Stand before the Elden Ring, become Elden Lord," end quote. Which would certainly seem to imply that the process of becoming Elden Lord, that is, of burning down the Erdtree, reforging the Elden Ring, and becoming Elden Lord, is in some way cyclical. And it's certainly no coincidence that both the opening cutscene and the final cutscene use the same phrase when they tell us the fallen leaves tell a story. This phrase bookends our journey, because this has happened before, and it may happen again, depending on the ending you choose. In fact, the narrator is quite explicit in the Mending Rune endings when he says,
"The fallen leaves tell a story of how a Tarnished became Elden Lord."
The fallen leaves tell our story after the end of the game. But then, whose story did they tell in the beginning of the game? Either way, the fallen leaves tell the story of the end of the previous age, and of the previous tree. Quite literally, the fallen leaves are physical evidence of the demise of that previous tree. Whether we're talking about the Erdtree that we ourselves burned down in-game, or events that occurred long before our character stepped foot in the Lands Between. The tantalizing clues of a prior burning of the Erdtree started years before the game was even released. The very first trailer for Elden Ring at E3 2019, which all the way back then opens with Marika shattering and Radagon attempting to repair the Elden Ring, also contains this little teaser nugget.
Don't tell me you don't see it. Look up at the sky. It burns.
Of course, we wouldn't have any way of knowing it at the time, but the burning sky is indeed an image we would one day see again, caused by the burning of the Erdtree. The trailer seems to do a bit of visual misdirection there, and instead shows us the rot-red sky of Caelid. But after defeating Malekith and unleashing the Rune of Death, we see the true source of the burning sky. But interestingly, this narrator, whoever he is, seems to be suggesting that he already sees it burning, right now, and he specifically links this to the shattering of the Elden Ring. Listen to that sequence once again.
Shattered by someone or something. Don't tell me you don't see it. Look up at the sky. It burns.
To this narrator, the shattering of the ring and the burning of the tree are somehow linked, and most importantly, they are not merely the domain of prophecy. They are happening right now to him. Then later, in the story trailer released just a couple of months before the game, we see a scene depicted from the Shattering War. By definition, a war which occurred after Marika's shattering of the Elden Ring. This scene shows us one of the sieges of Leyndell, but as the camera pans down to the action, we can see what appears to be the Erdtree itself aflame. Blink and you might miss it, but slowing it down makes the twinkle of flame, almost exactly how it looks when Melina first sets it alight at the endgame, clear enough. The Erdtree appears to be burning in this scene, and in combination with the prior line, "Look up at the sky, it burns," we know that the people of this world have experienced the burning of the Erdtree before. Now, to be fair, this may risk overinterpretation of trailers, which are fundamentally advertisements, but they are clearly made with the close input of the core FromSoft team. Huge narrative reveals like the duality of Marika and Radagon, a mid to late game secret, are revealed to the close observer within seconds of the very first trailer, 3 years before the game was even released. Likewise for the Night of the Black Knives in the cinematic trailer, Malenia's first bloom at the Battle of Aeonia, and so on. So it's probably safe to interpret the narrative elements of these trailers. But even without the trailers, the evidence is equally compelling. When we do finally arrive to the city at the foot of the Erdtree, Leyndell, the city is covered with ash, suggesting a preceding great conflagration. This is a topic we've discussed multiple times before, but to briefly review, ash in the city is deposited everywhere throughout the city, in a distribution not well explained by the corpse of Grandsex. For example, there is ash at the Capital Rampart or at Marika's bedchamber, about as far away from Grandsex as one could possibly get. And the inhabitants of the city have sealed their windows to prevent the ash from entering, indicating that not only was it a great cataclysmic event, but that the people here continued living on despite it. These sealed windows are such a bizarre artistic choice, something we have never seen in any other medium, although we have seen it in the real world, as it mirrors practices from the American Dust Bowl. During our first playthrough, we were so intrigued by these details that in order to adequately explain them, we made our very first video. That's right, there would be no TA without the piles of ash and sealed windows of Leyndell. The source of the ash, while initially quite mysterious, only becomes clear in retrospect. Once at the end of the game, we release the Rune of Death and burn down the Erdtree, transforming Leyndell into the Ashen Capital. In places where there was once just a relatively thin coating, the ramparts, the homes, the alleyways, now another thick layer of visually identical ash has been deposited on top, and the capital has been fully transformed into an apocalyptic scene, befitting its new moniker as the Ashen Capital. Point being that whatever deposited the first layer of ash is likely the same process as the second layer. And since we know definitely what caused the second layer, because, well, we burned down the Erdtree, then it's not a great leap to understand that the first layer was evidence of a first burning. But, and this is just as crucial, if at the end of the game we choose to mend the Elden Ring, the spectral tree itself regenerates, but the new layer of ash remains. The spectral tree is tied inextricably to the state of the ring, something we'll return to at the end of the video, but just consider for now that when we mend the Elden Ring, the tree regenerates, and its hue reflects the specific mending rune chosen. But notice how in Ranni's ending, in which we do not mend the Elden Ring, we never see the tree again. And of course, the Frenzied Flame ending destroys the Erdtree for good. In other words, if there's no mending of the Elden Ring, then there's no reformed spectral Erdtree. But no matter which mending rune we choose to regenerate the spectral Erdtree, the ash still remains, lingering evidence of the prior age's convulsions. The fallen leaves tell a story. So imagine you, a lowly tarnished of no renown, persevere and achieve the impossible. You slay Radagon and mend the Elden Ring to usher in an age of fracture. But then one day, some upstart tarnished arrives to the lands between, seeking to replace you as Elden Lord. When they enter Leyndell, what would they see? Well, of course, they would see the good old Erdtree, radiant as ever, as if nothing ever happened to it, because remember, you regenerated its spectral form by mending the Elden Ring. But then there would also be this layer of, to them, inexplicable ash everywhere throughout the city. Probably they'd just ignore it, like most players do. But if noticed, it would speak volumes, as it would be the only lingering evidence that the Erdtree was burned before, by a prior tarnished, the one who now sits on the Elden throne. Perhaps, as the memory of lost grace suggests, quote, "It is merely a cycle. Stand before the Elden Ring, become Elden Lord," end quote. These would be themes and tropes that FromSoft are certainly no stranger to. In the Dark Souls trilogy, the player is just one of many who have tried, and many who have succeeded, in linking the First Flame, thereby becoming Lord of Cinder and forestalling the end of the Age of Fire. In Bloodborne, the long-gone civilizations of Thumaru, Ys, and Loran have all gone down the path of blood obsession, which currently consumes Yharnam, some falling to plague, others achieving kinship. Even in Sekiro, the subplot of Takeru and Tomoe reminds us that Kuro is not the first divine heir to attempt to sever his immortality. A divine heir and his loyal servant have been down this exact path before. But in contrast to, say, the First Flame of Dark Souls, which is the metaphorical light of civilization, kept alive if only faintly by the self-sacrifices of innumerable past lords and knights, here in Elden Ring, fire is used not to demarcate the apogee of an age, but instead its end. To burn the Erdtree is to attempt to end the current age. Although, to be fair, the end of one age is merely the beginning of another. It's simply a matter of perspective. As the sacred relic sword wrought from the body of the god of this age tells us, quote, "Thoughts on what the weapon portends are many and varied. Some consider it the mark of a great sin, or a sign of great devastation. Some think of it as the end of an age, while others the beginning," end quote. So after all that, there should be no doubt that a prior burning of the Erdtree occurred. But what exactly happened back then? Well, that's where things start to get interesting. We know that long ago the Erdtree had an age of plenty, during which it bestowed life-giving sap. The city at its foot held sacred rituals in which they baptized one another in sap sacraments, and Queen Marika the Eternal controlled this vivifying power. But this age of free-flowing bounty did not last, and in fact, it ended quite swiftly. The Blessed Dew Talisman tells us, quote, "It was once thought that the blessed sap of the Erdtree would drip from its boughs forever. But that age of plenty swiftly came to a close, and with time the Erdtree became more an object of faith," end quote. The Crimson Seed Talisman follows with, quote, "The Erdtree was once perfect and eternal, and thus it was believed that Erdtree seeds could not exist," end quote. And finally, the Golden Seed, found at the base of an illusory tree, reads, quote, "When the Elden Ring was shattered, these seeds flew from the Erdtree, scattering across the various lands as if life itself knew that its end had come," end quote. These descriptions are both informative and poignant. Like the inhabitants of mighty imperial Rome, stretching at its height from Britain to Mesopotamia and divinely sanctioned, the Erdtree faithful believed, they knew, that their empire would last forever. It was simply the way of things, In our world, only the truly calamitous sacking of Rome in the 5th century could shock them out of this delusion, and even still it would take another 1,000 years and a wholly different conqueror from the steppes to put this hubristic notion to rest. It is probably human nature, after all. We don't know, or perhaps we choose not to admit, that we are living in the fading light of a dying sun. So the Erdtree faithful knew that their age, their empire, their Erdtree would last forever. After all, the Erdtree is perfect and eternal, right? No surprise then that when Marika shattered the Elden Ring, convulsions rocked the empire. The Erdtree itself bolted, meaning it prematurely dispersed its seeds in this time of crisis. But then something unexpected happened. Radagon, using the same hammer used to shatter the ring, attempted to mend it. And the way he did so was by attaching a trellis to it and marshalling the power of vines to conceal the gaping wound at the heart of this order. The developers have clearly done their homework when it comes to drawing inspiration from plant biology in their story, because the biological ecosystem of a real-world forest is every bit as vicious, competitive, and violent as the Shattering War.
It's just, and nature here is vile and base. I wouldn't see anything erotical here. I would see fornication and asphyxiation and choking and fighting for survival and growing and just rotting away.
But the relevant plant biological metaphor here is that of serotiny, or more formally, pyrescence, the phenomenon by which some plants actually require intense heat from fire in order to reproduce most effectively. A good example would be some species of pine, like the North American lodgepole pine, which produce a subset of cones that only open up and release their seeds during the intense heat of a fire. After the forest has burned and the canopy opened up and exposed the forest floor to carbon-rich ash and sunlight, seeds from these serotinous cones will germinate and become the next generation of pines in the forest. This is an evolutionary adaptation to one of the inescapable facts of life in a forest, that periodically a fire will burn through the forest. These cycles of burning and regrowth also parallel our narrative conception of real-world history, the rise and fall of empires following an inexorably natural course, an idea dating back at least as far back as Herodotus. Nothing lasts forever, not a life-giving golden tree, not its supposedly eternal god, and certainly not the empire built around it. So when the current age has run its course, there is only one thing left to do: to burn it all down and start anew. From the ashes of the prior age, a new age will be born. In Elden Ring, we still don't, or at least we didn't, know who actually was responsible for the burning of the Erdtree. In our first video, we thought it likely, and still do, that Melina at least participated, willingly or not, in this plot, consequently leaving her burned and bodiless, as she says, even her spectral form scarred conspicuously by the flame. But she would be the kindling maiden, so the question is, who was her accomplice? Whose flame burnt down the Erdtree? Now, with the DLC trailer and its additional information, there is good reason to believe that we finally have an answer. The fiery demigod Messmer, who wields an eponymous flame with which he set the Land of Shadow ablaze. In our Serpent and Erdtree video, we hypothesized the existence, based on multiple lines of admittedly circumstantial evidence, of a prior attempt to burn the Erdtree by some unknown, snake-associated, black flame-wielding traitor who predated Rykard's blasphemy. Well, Messmer fits that bill pretty much to a T. He prominently wields flame and is strongly associated with serpents, both in his iconography and his visual design. The serpent is, of course, independently associated with the burning of the Erdtree. Go watch that video for full details, but briefly, there is a painting of a burning Erdtree in the Volcano Manor, indicating at the very least intent, if not history. Their insignia shows a serpent coiled around the Erdtree as if strangling it. Make of that what you will in relation to the Shadow Tree. And most importantly, the serpent has long been considered a traitor to and enemy of the Erdtree, since at least the time of the Age of Godfrey, according to the duelist armor worn by sacrifices in the Colosseum whose deaths at the hands of the Crucible Knights were cheered on by the crowd. Speaking of the Crucible Knights, in the DLC trailer we can see the player imitating a Crucible Knight attack in their fight against Messmer, which reenacts precisely this ancient battle between the Crucible Knights and the Serpent. The Serpent has been the enemy of the Erdtree since the time of Godfrey and his Crucible Knights, but nothing in-game ever made it explicitly clear what this treachery was that led to the everlasting enmity between the Serpent and the Erdtree. Based on Messmer's association with flame and serpents, it would fit quite nicely with the information we have if Messmer, a demigod once allied with the Erdtree, committed the first cardinal sin. He burnt down the Erdtree, using Melina as kindling and leaving her burned and bodiless, causing the serpent to become the ultimate avatar of treachery and leading to his banishment to the Land of Shadow. Speaking of the Land of Shadow, Bandai's official description says it is set ablaze by Messmer's flame, and the promo images do indeed seem to suggest that the land itself has been set aflame. But this could also explain the curious visual design of the Shadow Tree. We had a whole video prepared on its inspiration from real-world Strangler Fig biology, the additional evidence of crafting and chimerism in the Deeproot Depths, and how that relates to the main game story, but we'll leave that until we actually play the DLC, since we're likely to get so much more information. For now, we'd just like to focus on a very specific aspect of its visual design. It appears to be burnt. Probably you noticed, as we were droning on about Serotomy and forest fires, that a burnt forest has a very particular look. First of all, the tree bark is charred black, and the leaves and needles, as they are the most flammable material, are usually consumed first, ultimately leaving a charred, black, barren, and leafless appearance that quite perfectly matches the depiction of the Shadow Tree. Compare this tree to the golden tree we all know. It has no leaves, as opposed to the brilliantly golden canopy of the Erdtree. Its bark is charred black, with flakes of what appeared to be charred bark falling off in multiple shots and angles. We've heard this theorized to be Godwyn's Deathblight, and sure, anything's possible in this game, but the characteristic feature of Deathblight is its thorns. Think of Ragier's death animation, or the player character's death when blighted, or in fact, any of the Deathblight in Godwyn's body in Arena. They all have prominent thorns, none of which are present on the Shadow Tree. Not to mention that both trees here are charred black, not just the Winding Strangler Fig. So the simplest explanation here is that this tree has been burnt, in all likelihood by Messmer's flame. As the Bandai website even explicitly tells us, the Land of Shadow is, quote, a land purged in an unsung battle, set ablaze by Messmer's flame, end quote. So we have evidence of a prior burning of the Erdtree in the lands between, likely by Messmer, and then we have the remnants of a burnt tree, called the Shadow of the Erdtree, in the Land of Shadow, which is now apparently ruled over by Messmer. This all seems to imply some relationship between the burning of the Erdtree and the creation of the Shadow Tree. And this relationship is the key to unlocking the mystery of the DLC. So let's finally put all the pieces together to form a narrative, incomplete though it may be until the DLC comes out. Both the Shadow Tree and the Erdtree were burnt, though the consequences have left them in quite different states. The Shadow Tree is charred, dead, and leaking its precious golden sap, while the Erdtree remains brilliant as ever, despite the ash in Leyndell attesting to a prior burning. So perhaps these two burning events are actually one and the same. In the lands between, Messmer burnt the Erdtree. For punishment of this cardinal sin, he was banished to the Shadow Realm, along with the charred corpse of the Erdtree. In other words, the Shadow Tree is the Erdtree, or rather the burnt remains of the Erdtree and how it once looked back when it was fleshy, corporeal, and more than just an object of faith. In fact, we've seen this sort of dichotomous death before, in the case of Rani the Lunar Princess. Her original body is a charred corpse atop the Divine Tower of Liurnia. But her spirit lives on, now inhabiting a doll made in the image of her mentor. So perhaps when the Erdtree was burnt, its charred corpse was sent to the Shadowlands, and in its place a spectral illusion was formed. In fact, the Shadowlands may have even been created at this time. Remember that Miyazaki has stated previously that the Lands Between and the Shadow Realm used to be one and the same. In his own words, referring to the Land of Shadow, he said, quote, "In terms of setting and themes, it technically occupies the same space as the Lands Between, the same universe. But due to something story-related that we won't reveal today, this has become physically disconnected," end quote. So it used to be a unified realm, and then it was split off. Something must have caused that to happen, and the destruction of the Erdtree is certainly a worthy candidate. But we can go even further in putting this mystery together, where we can even begin to date this event. In the DLC images and trailer, we can see that the Shadow Tree is leaking golden sap, something we know the Erdtree hasn't done for a long time, since the end of the Age of Plenty. So we can deduce that this burning event and the creation of the Shadow Tree occurred during the Age of Plenty. Remember the Blessed Dew Talisman description, which tells us, quote, "It was once thought that the blessed sap of the Erdtree would drip from its boughs forever, but that Age of Plenty swiftly came to a close, and with time the Erdtree became more an object of faith," end quote. A swift end to the Age of Plenty certainly connotes a particular catastrophe, not just the withering that occurs over time. The physical, fleshy Erdtree, which bestowed blessings of life-giving sap from its boughs during the Age of Plenty, was burnt down, causing the Age of Plenty to end. The charred corpse of the Erdtree, evidence of the crime, to be banished to the Land of Shadow, and the creation of a spectral Erdtree to serve as an object of faith in its stead. Of course, the Erdtree is not the only entity to linger on in spectral form alone. So too does the Kindling Maiden, Melina, who, after serving as kindling for the first burning, remains burned and bodiless. Her fate, it seems, has always been tied to that of the Erdtree. She was born at the foot of the Erdtree, where her mother gave her her purpose. That purpose, of course, was to burn together with the Erdtree. And after both were burnt, they both lingered on in their spectral forms. Precisely why this partial death occurred is not known, but it is likely due to the absent Rune of Death. If you summon her to fight Morgott, upon her death she will even spawn a miniature spectral Erdtree, perhaps reflecting her role in the creation of its current state. Their fates dovetail once again in the end of the game, when Melina's specter is used as kindling to burn the Erdtree specter. Which means that if we're right about any of this, and the physical Erdtree's charred corpse lies hidden in the Land of Shadow, then so too does Melina's. So, come June 21st, fellow archaeologists, let's go digging. On our new excavation site, keep an eye out for a corpse, burned but unmistakably regal, or perhaps a conspicuous funerary urn, as it could be the final resting place of our companion Melina, she who would play the role of maiden, but whose history and fate was always far grander.
The one who walks alongside flame shall one day meet the road of destined death.